Nottingham Forest v Wolves. August 1976. Newly relegated Wolves take 2,000 to Forest for a Midlands derby, but don't realise there's a big surprise waiting for them. Let's hear the stories. Forest executive crew member Donald told us, "Yes, I remember it well. The city ground was a terrible place to go for away fans, and if you weren't organised, it could be fatal. Some away firms were organised, such as Chelsea and West Ham. They did their homework and knew where to meet up and where to go. They tried to arrive together as a firm and stayed tight-knit. Chelsea were easily the best firm to ever come to Forest, although their claims that they took our Trent End in '77 are laughable. They were given it, along with 3 other teams that same season due to ground improvements. Anyway, I digress. Wolves certainly weren't organised. They all arrived at different times. The football special arrived about 1:30 p.m. and was immediately attacked and put to the sword. They scattered like rats. The coaches were attacked as soon as they arrived at about 2 p.m. Some fled there, and others made it to the East Stand, only to be attacked there, and they fled to the Bridgeford End. Then, more coaches arrived late, about 3:20 p.m, and they moved into the Bridgeford singing Wanderers. I don't think they got more than 2 choruses out, when the East Stand boys simply marched through the gate separating the 2 terraces that had mysteriously been left open, wink wink, and battered the Wolves fans who fled to all parts of the ground, including the pitch and down the players' tunnel. It was an annihilation so complete, I don't remember seeing anything like it in all my years of watching Forest. A small group of Wolves did a Custer's last stand, but Forest were evil that day and simply overwhelmed them into submission, with the police finally intervening and leading them away down the players' tunnel. When Wolves scored after about 30 minutes, no Wolves fans were left, and I heard they bought a total of 2,000 fans. So I reckon 1,999 must have left the ground by half-time. It was carnage and a surprise to everyone because Molyneux in those days was a tough place to go. But obviously, the home firm was a bit more resolute than the away boys, that's for sure. There was some good news for Wolves though. At least they didn't get thrown in the Trent after the match. That happened to a lot of away fans. Those that bothered to stay the whole match, that is. Happy days. Wolves fan Mike told us. I remember it like it was yesterday. A week before the match, I was at work when a West Brom supporting colleague asked me if I was going to Forest on the upcoming Saturday. When I replied he warned me that it was a horrible place to go and that the Forest fans attack you wherever you are. I scoffed and told him we would be fine. Little did I know, Wolves had been relegated from the old First Division in May. Wolves' legendary manager Bill McGarry sadly paid the price. Relieved of his duties, his assistant Sammy Chung was appointed first-team manager. Wolves had kept hold of their star players in readiness for a quick return to the top flight. The season had started somewhat disappointingly. The first 2 games were pitched against their fellow relegatees. A scoreless home draw Burnley, then a 2-2 draw away against Sheffield United. Next up, Forest away. Forest were in the process of being rebuilt by a certain Brian Clough. Clough had taken over the previous January and steered them towards a modest mid-table position. Now Clough had been reunited in pre-season with his erstwhile assistant Peter Taylor. This should be the starting point for Damned United the sequel. Yet, fans of Wolves contemplating their journey to the city ground, there was always a sense of trepidation. Crowd disorder in the mid-70s had moved through to a dangerous phase, which would lead to the dreadful episodes of the 80s. Most clubs in the mid-70s had experienced bouts of crowd disorder, some worse than others. Hooliganism was moving through a more serious phase. A lot of clubs had seen hooligan elements decamp from their traditional home ends into the away end. Indeed, Wolves supporters were beginning to be involved in a number of serious outbreaks of disorder, notably in the South Bank. For younger supporters reading this, segregation then was at best a thin line of policemen, or at some grounds nothing at all. For most away supporters of this period, the journey from train, coach and car was made without supervision. Once inside the ground, most away fans would pay on the turnstile to what would be a historic away end. and would experience little trouble. That was changing in the mid-70s, with away ends attracting elements of hostile home support. Some clubs were notorious away days, notably London clubs along with Liverpool and Manchester. The usual rule of thumb in those days for attending the aforementioned grounds was to adopt a low profile. For example, forming a raucous choir in the scoreboard end of Old Trafford in the early 70s would be risking life and limb. Nottingham Forest away on the 28th of August was what the Americans would describe a perfect storm, a handful of police on duty. Stewards were still years away. No fences to segregate fans, a forest ground which allowed supporters once in to access any terracing in the ground. And worse, a group of supporters who were fast gaining a reputation for serious crowd disorder. Add into that a number of previous crowd disorder incidents featuring Wolves and Forest fans, and you had the recipe for serious trouble. 3 friends and I set off from Bridgnorth in a beat-up old Mini. After parking up some way from the ground, it soon became clear whilst walking to the ground that serious trouble was brewing. As we made our way past the Bridgeford stand towards the since-named Brian Clough stand. The Bridgeford stand then was an uncovered open terrace. As a few Wolves coaches began to disgorge a boisterous mob, a sort of chanting standoff aimed at Forest fans occupying the Bridgeford stand soon turned ugly. The Forest fans charged down the terrace towards the stand exit points, then proceeded to rip the gates apart. Yes, that's right, ripped off the gates of their own stand to attack the Wolves fans baiting them in the adjacent car park. After a melee that lasted some time, police intervention saw the Forest fans retreat back to where they'd came from, leaving the beleaguered Wolves fans to queue into the Brian Clough stand, just when you thought it would be safer in the ground. The Forest mob poured under the Brian Clough stand and started attacking Wolves fans as they came through the turnstiles. That was the final straw for quite a few of us. We decided to take our chance by entering the Bridgeford stand on the other side of the ground. Incognito with colours hidden, we were able to enter the ground only to witness a large group of Wolves fans under siege in the lower terracing of the Brian Clough stand. Without police intervention, it resembled a kind of raucous drift, with scores of Forest fans literally queuing up to attack the group of Wolves fans pinned against the seating tier behind them. As for ourselves, we stood incognito in the Bridgeford Road end, our scarves stuffed in our pockets. As the teams limbered up, we just prayed for the full-time whistle to blow at 0-0. Bobby Gould, in his second spell at the club, put Wolves up 2-up within 30 minutes. The first goal lit the fuse, the second ignited the blast. Wolves fans who had slipped into the Bridgeford Road end incognito suddenly found themselves under siege. Forest fans up for the fight surged around the ground towards the flashpoint, which had moved into the corner of the Bridgeford Road end. Wolves fans, heavily outnumbered, were forced onto the pitch. The game was halted whilst police reinforcements tried to restore order. At one point, Brian Clough had a Forest hooligan in a headlock. Even coaching staff tried to help the police to restore order. Finally, the police, who could not prevent the hostile Forest fans from spilling onto the pitch, decided that they could not guarantee the safety of the remaining Wolves fans. The remnants of visible Wolves support were forced to leave the ground through the players' tunnel, leaving a shell-shocked Cloughie appealing for calm from the centre circle. This match for me and my friends was the most terrifying experience ever at a football match. Never have I remained completely motionless when Wolves have scored, and that day was my only experience of ever cheering an away goal. We were able to survive that day, suffering a few bruises, but we were luckier than a lot of Wolves fans that day. How that day never ended in a fatality is a miracle. Once the match was finished, we managed to get escorted to our car by some kind older Forest fans who had spotted us trying to look incognito, as Forest fans attacked any Wolves they could find outside the stadium. Once back home, the stories arrived thick and fast, and everyone was determined to get revenge on Forest when they came to Molyneux in February 1977. In fact, there was a song sung for weeks, "Wait till Forest come to Molyneux." When they did, They bought a massive firm. All the Wolves old boys turned up, but Forest wouldn't budge an inch in the old South Bank. Some firms did, but not Forest. A very underestimated firm, if you ask me. That end of that season, we were both promoted into the First Division, now the Premier League. Forest only just making it because Wolves won at Bolton on the last match of the season. Oh, the irony. When Wolves went back to Forest the next season, there was no repeat of the battering we took there previously. I went by Footy Special, and although it was an interesting journey, I think the police had been criticised for the previous year's shenanigans, so were out in much bigger force and stopped most of the trouble happening. So there is my Forest story. It was definitely on par with the battering we took at Man United in the previous March, and probably the only time in my life supporting Wolves that I've seen as completely and utterly battered, although we didn't even turn up to Millwall 77 and Chelsea 76 was nearly as bad. We thank Donald and Mike for their recollections. It's clear that Forest City Ground was a hostile place to visit, and I've heard many stories of the infamous River Trent becoming a swimming lesson for unsuspecting away fans. Forest are highly rated in many hooligan books and stories, so it's no surprise lesser firms like Wolves suffered there. Thanks for watching. Now please comment, like, share and subscribe as it really helps our channel grow.